As a preemptive warning, this episode discusses depression and suicide, topics that can be upsetting and disturbing for some listeners. Let's talk about farmers. You know, those folks who put food on our tables, sustain our economy, those people who toil tirelessly to make a living. The ones many of us rarely, if ever, give a second thought. Because the life of a farmer is not an easy one. Grueling hours, strenuous hard work, isolation, the whims of the market, not to mention the whims of the weather. All of the uncontrollable elements of nature that no one can do anything about. And all these stressors, worries, and struggles, they're adding up to a growing mental health crisis among agricultural communities, one that has been vastly overlooked, mostly neglected, and largely underserved. Until now. I'm Amanda DeJong, and you're listening to Now at Ohio State. We talk with researchers, innovators, and bold thinkers who look at our world, see what the real challenges are, and create the solutions that people need now. There are people who are dedicating their lives to serving this perpetually underserved community, taking to the fields and the rural corners of Ohio to connect with those in need. One such person is Bridget Britain. Britain is the behavioral health field specialist in the Agriculture and Natural Resources program here at Ohio State. She works with local agriculture service agencies and healthcare providers throughout Ohio to recognize warning signs and address farmers' stress and mental health. In particular, she does trainings on suicide prevention education and awareness. She sits down with R. Ross Bischoff to discuss the growing mental health issues among farmers, what's behind them, and how people like her are looking to turn the tide for this vital community.
Bridget, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks so much for having me, Ross. I appreciate being here.
Mental health has gotten important attention in recent years, but some populations are getting left out of those discussions and maybe not getting the important resources they need. Can you talk about the population you're working with at OSU Extension and how you help them?
I am the behavioral health field specialist, which means that I serve our whole state at OSU Extension. I go in all 88 counties, and I provide suicide education and prevention awareness in our rural and agriculture communities. So I will go in and do trainings. I'll go in and do topics about the types of resources that we have available, whether it's through extension or whether it's through national hotlines or things like that. And then I come and I do, awareness kind of things like this. So I work with farmers. I work with people that support farmers. And then I work with healthcare and mental health care providers.
Just looking at the statistics, it seems like in recent years, farmers have had a lot of struggles with mental health issues. For instance, there's been a high rise of suicides. Can you talk about the stressors farmers face in the stories you've heard?
They face a bunch of unique stressors that the average person does not face, right? And they suffer from a lot of isolation that we as a general population don't face or don't have to face if we don't want to. They have to worry about weather a lot. They have to worry about the prices, what's called commodity, or the product that they either plant in the ground or that they raise, chickens or cows or whatever. They have to worry about government regulations that we don't have to worry about. They have to worry about what's called ag law or succession planning, who's going to take over the farm after somebody dies or somebody, if they decide to retire, right? That 90-year-old person who's not ready to give up the farm, but it's time to give up the farm. And so those are all things that really play a big impact into the stressors that kind of increase the mental health challenges that the farming community has. And then just really the isolation factor, they don't have anybody to talk to, and they're not necessarily as willing to talk to people. The more you really look at them as a subgroup of people, the more you realize these are an underserved population in terms of The traditional farmer, according to the United States Department of Agriculture in Ohio, is 95% white males. And they are ages 34 to 65, with the outliers being up to age 75. And I didn't point this out before, but males ages 34 to 65 lead suicide rates in the United States. And so I think that they are an underserved population that people are hesitant for societal and political and just historical reasons say they don't need that extra support, but they really do. I mean, data shows that to us. The statistics that you've talked about, the rise in suicides, show us that, and the stigma that is with them, that they don't want to reach out for help. In the rural and agriculture community, it's a small town. If you go to a place that is the only a mental health provider in the county or in your town, think of a town of 1,000 people. Everybody knows who you are in a town of 1,000 people because half the people are probably related to each other. It's not like Columbus, right, where you could live in the same city block as somebody and never interact with that person again. But going to the mental health agency as, oh, there's Joe's car, right? Again, what's he doing there, right? Think about the stigmas that we have society still as a whole amplified in our rural communities, and they all know each other.
Yeah, and talking to you earlier, you said you face a lot of these stigmas when you're talking to farmers. So what are the stigmas that you see? Like, do they have that old school mentality of therapy is not something people should do? Just kind of talk about the stigmas you've seen in this community.
It's been interesting the past couple of years because you really get a mix of people. I've seen a lot of younger people who have said, I don't need this. I've seen a lot of older people who've said, I don't need this. This isn't for me. This is silly. This is dumb. But I've seen a lot of older people that have said, I wish we would have had this in the 80s. There was a big farm crisis in the 80s where, farming and agriculture just really crashed and really took a big hit. And I've had, 90-year-old gentlemen come up to me and say, I lost a lot of friends and I wish we would have talked about mental health and the work that you do back then because that would have saved my friends' lives. We lost at least 4 farmers within a week. It just breaks your heart. And then you hear the family and friends saying, if we only had the resources, right? If we only had the information. And it's just like, wow, like you feel like you're doing the work and you feel like you're putting it in and you feel like you're going to all these places, but it's still not getting through because these people, the farmers, are so scared to talk to anybody. They're so nervous about talking to their family and their friends and to share, I'm struggling.
And another thing you told me is farmers would have no problem ending their lives because of everything at their homes, everything they have. They have the means to do so, right?
They have more access to weapons, guns, just even things in general like rope. They also have access to medication for their livestock that you and I might have trouble accessing. So they could just save it up and not give it to their livestock, right? It's not going to hurt anything. And so they have a lot more means to do it than what we would have because there's not as much oversight.
What are the other barriers farmers and maybe just the general population have to getting mental health resources?
Probably some of the biggest barriers that farmers, rural communities have is transportation. Any mental health provider is 45 minutes. There's very limited travel options, transportation options. So if you don't drive, how do you get anywhere? Is really the big key factor there. So transportation is a huge one. Farmers have to buy their own insurance. I mean, they are self-employed. So, my insurance pays for X amount of mental health, treatments. But if a farmer doesn't choose to opt into their own medical and mental health insurance, then they have to pay for it out of pocket.
And then another barrier seems to be a lot of mental health professionals just don't understand the life of a farmer. Is that correct?
I mean, they don't know what they don't know, right? There is a language barrier between farmers and mental health providers. A farmer can really quickly be turned off by somebody. And if a mental health provider, think about all the acronyms they talk about. I'm a therapist, so I sit in a room and I'm like, okay, we need to stop using acronyms because I don't have time for this, right? And I always say that. So we started this program called Farm Stress Certified, and we partner with the College of Social Work, and our group does a training where we invite the mental health professionals in the state of Ohio, and they do a 3-part series where they learn basic things about farmers, about rural communities, the stigmas they face, the stressors they face, the unique things that are in the farming communities. We talk about what is an acre, right? Because did you know, Ross, how big an acre is? An acre is the size of a football field, right? And so just having that knowledge, what a good indicator of how stressed a farmer could be is how much do they have planted during planting season? How much do they have harvested during typical harvest season, right? Those are indicators. It's easy for anybody, all of us, to say, I'm fine. But a good indicator for a farmer is to say, this is how much I have planted. This is how much I don't have harvested yet. The weather, a lot of people when they take our class are like, I had no idea how much weather plays a role, right? You and I can say, I'm so glad it's not raining, or I'm so glad it's, not freezing. They need the ground to freeze in the winter. We want it to be mild winters. They don't necessarily want it to be mild winters. Rain plays a huge role all year for them. And so this training, we talk about all of that plus much more. And the feedback from the mental health professionals has been phenomenal. They have wanted more information. We get feedback on the other types of topics that they want to talk about when it comes to the agriculture community. And we have a directory for farmers that they can go to, the mental health. They have to be licensed mental health providers that they can list themselves on so that a farmer can go and say, okay, I live in Scioto County, and these are who are listed as trained and Farm Stress Certified if they've taken all the trainings, the 3 trainings. And we're just really happy at how successful it's been because these mental health providers are just like, wow, I had no idea that I didn't know, right? All of this stuff. And it's been so helpful to me to learn this.
It feels like you're setting the groundwork for an incredible change. I would imagine over the next few years, we won't necessarily see those statistics drop in a major way, but over time, you've turned this in the right direction. Why is this work so important to you, and do you feel optimistic?
This population has really become so special to me. We have a lot of new educators in counties, and I'm reaching out to them, and a lot of them are reaching out to me before I can even reach out to them. And so I had somebody come and reach out to me that said, my county is asking for this. People in my county are asking for this. What can I give them right now before you can even come and speak? Like, I need information right now. And so I hope that I'm out of a job soon. And, before that, I'm excited to focus more with our youth. Our youth are hungry for this topic. They want to talk about mental health to our rural youth because their resources and lack of resources are just as much as the adults as well.
If a farmer is out there struggling with their mental health, what would be maybe a few pieces of advice you'd give them right away?
If somebody is struggling with a mental health, let's say it's an immediate struggle at this moment, right? If somebody out there is listening right now and they're struggling, I would want to share with you that you're not alone, right? That you should never feel like you're a burden to anybody because you're not. Right? There is somebody out there that cares about you, whether you feel like that or not. Somebody cares about you. Somebody needs you. Somebody loves you. It might not be somebody that you even think about or that should be the person, right? But you have 988, which is the National Suicide and Mental Health Helpline. It's a great line to call. It's a great immediate line to call, right? They are there to support you. They're there to give you resources and information. I love 988 for our rural and agriculture communities because it's 100% anonymous. 24/7. They can call when they're on their tractor, when they're in their car, right? If they just want somebody to talk to, and I was just talking to somebody about this the other day, like statistically speaking, we don't really know, but like if you're somebody that's struggling and there's no mental health resources available other than 988. If you need to call 988 every day, call 988 every day. That's what's important if you're struggling right now. We have other resources available. We have a Farm Stress website. It's really simple. It's go.osu.edu/farmstress. But I would also say that there are trainings out there that you could take if you want to just learn more about mental health, if you want to learn about how you can support somebody either as a farmer or as somebody who's supporting farmers. And OSU Extension has some really great trainings that we offer. Our team offers is called Mental Health First Aid. It is a actually internationally evidence-based curriculum that really simply walks you through some warning signs and symptoms of potential mental health challenges. There's an adult version, adults that work or interact with youth, and then there's actually a teen version, so teens take it to support other teens. It is not meant for professionals. It is meant for people who just want to learn more information and how they can support somebody in a potential immediate crisis situation like suicide or other like substance abuse and things like that.
Perfect. Bridget, thank you so much. This work is incredible, and this has been very enlightening. Thank you so much for your work.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
There's been a lot of talk about the weather so far, and for good reason. A farmer's concern about the weather reaches much further than, boy, it sure is a hot one today, or I hope it stops raining soon so I can enjoy the outdoors. Imagine having your livelihood directly linked to the weather, something you cannot control or change. Aaron Wilson understands this uncertainty well. Wilson is the state climatologist for Ohio, an assistant professor, and an agriculture, weather, and climate field specialist. With weather stressors increasing each year, he delivers critical information to extension educators throughout Ohio. At the Farm Science Review and in his regular talks around the state, he educates farmers on ways to be resilient with changing weather patterns, especially when dealing with weather extremes. Again, our Ross Bischoff sits with Aaron and talks about the shifting weather changes and how his work is helping farmers not only prepare and respond, but also put their minds more at ease about them.
Aaron, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
I'd like to just start off. Maybe you could kind of give us an idea of what you do and who you work with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an assistant professor, really an ag, weather, and climate specialist for the Department of Extension here at Ohio State. So that's in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. I interact with farmers and really the agricultural industry around Ohio, specifically on weather and climate-related topics. Obviously, weather affects us all in a lot of different ways, and certainly it affects our farmers across the state, but also our markets and grain and that sort of thing. And so this gives me an opportunity to work with our extension educators at the county level, our specialists around the state, and researchers as well to talk about, how does weather and climate impact these various aspects of agriculture in the state of Ohio.
Can you define the difference between weather and climate?
It's where my engagements start. Every time I give an engagement, we talk about the weather. What's happening right now? Weather changes very rapidly over short distances and short periods of time. We can have temperatures that really crash and drop 30, 40, even 50 degrees sometimes within a day. Of course, on a daily basis, those temperatures are rising during the afternoon. So weather is what's happening right now. It's what's all around us constantly. Climate is a more longer term look at that. It's looking at averages over longer periods of time. Generally, we talk about a 30-year window. So if I say today's normal high is blank, that's based on this date over a 30-year window. Right now, it's 1991 to 2020. But we can also look at climate over periods of 100 years, 1,000 years, hundreds of thousands of years. And that's certainly, when you think about climate, things have changed and evolved over longer periods of time. And that's really the difference between the two. So a good metaphor is you're out walking your dog. That dog's on a leash and can meander back and forth to fire hydrants or McDonald's wrappers. But generally, you can describe the average path of that dog by the path that you've taken. And so you're the climate, the dog is the weather. It goes back and forth in a chaotic fashion, but you can describe that statistical mean, and that's really what we mean by climate.
So can you maybe describe the stressors that the weather and climate put on farmers, like what they're dealing with?
How much time do you have, right? So you're thinking about when should I start planting, right? And maybe it's been a really wet winter and kind of a wet March. So the idea is, how long can I wait before I get into the fields? That Combined with, the fact that we know that certain crops, if you get them in early, like soybean, you get them in earlier, you can actually see more yield out of the crop, right? So there's always this economic question that's kind of at hand and at play. Once you plant that crop, really, you're at the mercy of what happens over the next several weeks to get the crops to emerge. If you think about 2023, last year, a lot of the state here in Ohio remained really dry after planting. And so crops were really slow to emerge. And a lot of people, that causes a lot of stress, right? And starts bearing down mentally on folks and even physically. So that's kind of one example of thinking about how what's happening with the weather kind of plays into that. From a climate perspective, one of the trends that we've seen, obviously, is an increase in overall rainfall, precipitation, but the intensity of those rainfall events is increasing. And so when you have farms and farmers that experience maybe multiple sort of heavy rain events that flush out parts of their field or make it incapable of getting into the field in a timely fashion, that starts to wear on folks over time. And so farmers are, I think, feeling those pressures, not just in a year-to-year basis, but then over time, as our climate is changing, we're having to adjust or change how we plant, harvest, the types of things we plant. That stress can start to mount.
And when we talked before, you had some startling statistics about how climate is changing. There being less days for farmers to work, for instance. Can you discuss that?
We do know that our temperatures are warming. We're getting warmer, but it's not equally across all seasons. For instance, our winters, our springs here in Ohio and the Midwest, they're warming more rapidly than the summertime, right? In the summer, most of our warmth has been coming in overnight lows versus daytime highs. Our daytime highs have not been getting warmer, but the overnight lows have. When you combine that with precipitation, we know winters and springs are getting a lot wetter. And so if you think about that, the wet condition in months like April and May, and you look at that perfect planting window, what we've seen since the mid-1990s is essentially we've lost 5 days in April of suitable fieldwork conditions, not just planting, but just fieldwork, getting the field ready, prepped, all of that stuff. And we've also lost 5 days of suitable fieldwork in October here in Ohio since 1995.
How do you kind of work with them and help them sort of acclimate to this or build some resiliency? Can you just kind of talk about that?
Yeah. So for me, the process really begins, we talked about weather and climate. Let's understand what's happening today, how it's different than what's happened over the last 30 years, but how they're related. I think that that's a good place to start. The other thing I like to remind folks is how personal it is. It really is personal, because if you happen to be on a farm that catches this 5.5-inch rainfall event in 2 hours, but your neighbor doesn't, your impacts are going to be very different than the neighbor next to you. Some of this isn't fair, and we know that, different areas, overall, we're experiencing more of these heavy rainfall events, but they're not going to be equally distributed among all of us, so we all share the burden evenly. We know that. So thinking about that is really important. So it's about knowing what are the local changes, what's happening here in Ohio, what's happening in Northwest Ohio that may be different than Southeast Ohio, and how does that impact what you do from a farm management perspective? And when I say farm management, I mean that means the economics, that means the supply, the inputs, the outputs. All of these things need to be considered. Once we understand what the local changes are, how can we then start to build a healthier kind of relationship, more resilience from these big events, right? And can we tap into other areas like conservation that show just benefits outside of a changing climate? Okay, well, if we're seeing heavier rainfall events, can we start to think, is it right for you on a personal level to think about cover crops? What do cover crops do? Well, they have roots in the ground, right? They kind of cover that bare surface. So when you get heavier rainfall in the wintertime, January, February, a 1-inch or a 2-inch rainfall event is hitting a crop that's there, that has roots in the ground, right? It's not just bare soil, and it's less likely to flush, move soil and contribute to soil erosion. And that's really the name of the game, small tweaks that increase efficiency. We have this term climate smart agriculture, and this is what we talk a lot about. How can I be climate smart? Most of it, it's just being good managers of our resources. About 75% of it's small tweaks.
Do you think people are surprised, like maybe outside the farming community, to realize everything farmers have to deal with on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think it's good for all of us to understand what the pressures are for farmers, the margins of error. The 1 or 2 big weather impacts can really destroy an entire season for a farmer. So could you imagine making, zero money this year? right? You might have a good year the following year, but this year you're making zero, right? And the stress that can involve if you've got complete loss. And so I think a greater appreciation for what farmers do could go a long way. So just understanding that, I think, is really important.
If I'm struggling and I hate my job, I can just quit and find another job, and maybe most people can do that. Why don't farmers just do that?
For me, the first thought that I have is, I guess that depends on how you view your job. Is it part of your identity and part of your culture? It might be a bigger shock. But the fact is that most farmers, it's not what they do, it's who they are. In the farms and the farming community and folks, it's been in, generations, 6, 7 generations of farmers. So they feeling like they lose that quote unquote occupation. Really, it's like losing family, right? It might be like losing connection to the past. And so I think there's an identity attached to it as well. And when that happens, you can see kind of how that loss can really be stressful.
Well, Aaron, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
I mean, let's be real. How many of us, as we're buttering our sweet corn, stop and think, I hope the crop yield for the farmer that grew this corn was a good one? Or, I wonder how that dairy farmer is doing? As we wipe the juice of a fresh tomato off our chin, do we ever consider not just where that tomato came from, but who grew it? And how are they doing now? Those who grow our food need our consideration. They're humans who have needs, wants, struggles, and sadness just like every other human. And they're the ones literally keeping us alive. So we should be concerned with their well-being. They deserve our attention, our thoughts, just as much as anyone else does. Because without them, there is no us. Now at Ohio State is produced by The Ohio State University's Office of Marketing and Communications. For more information, visit us at go.osu.edu/now. I'm your host, Amanda DeJong. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.